I'm Alex. Moderating today. Longtime product marketer at Meta and Spotify. This is gonna be a lot of fun. How about we start though? Very first question. Would you all like to go introduce yourself? Maybe like name, where you work, what you do, where you're dialing in from. And we can start with Claire.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me. My name is Claire Drummond. I run product marketing for Jira at Atlassian. Been there for I'll be 10 years this summer, so veteran at this point. And I am dialing in from our office in San Francisco, though I'm usually at home in Oakland. What were the other questions? What do I do?
Yeah, I think you got it. Where you work,
Okay.
what you do, where you're dialing in from. I think that's perfect. Greg, I see you coming off mute.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm Greg Gazelle. I lead our product marketing team here at Datadog, and I'm also dialing in from our San Francisco office.
SF
All right, that
representative.
leaves me. And my name's Aurelia Solomon. I lead product marketing for two products at Salesforce, our personalization and intelligence products across Marketing Cloud. And I am based in the Boston area, and I am dialing in from my house because I'm mostly remote.
I love it. A little bit of East Coast representation there as well. Okay, really cool. A lot of obviously very well-known companies, varied products, but looking forward to hearing your all's advice on this. But how about we dive right in? So, first question for the group, and yeah, and feel free, by the way, whoever wants to answer, just dive right in. But can you share a moment where you or your team either successfully influenced a team or failed to, and what did you learn?
I can go.
Greg, you want to go?
I was thinking about this one before the panel, and one that I failed, but then eventually was successful was at my previous company. We wanted to redo the sales deck, so the main corporate pitch. And the company at that point was moving from a single product to multi-product. So the pitch deck was really like kind of the original pitch of like, how do you sell this one single product? And it was time tested. The CEO wrote it. It worked well, but as the company grew and became more complicated and we were trying to have a higher level message, we went through the exercise of updating the deck, and we did a lot of sales research. We had a whole committee, like got a ton of feedback from the field, did a lot of testing, thought we had a pretty good idea of how to uplevel the message. And then I brought it to the CEO for kind of final stamp of approval and got absolutely ripped apart. Like called on my cell phone at night, like, what are you doing? Like, what's the matter with you? And it was terrifying. So it took a lot of work to kind of bounce back from that and figure out where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do next. And so within that, I got a piece of advice like from an old mentor about working with the CEO, which I think is applicable to working with a lot of other cross-functional groups, is like sometimes you have to go a little bit farther in your proposal to get back to the middle. And that's what we ended up doing here, is like taking our first iteration of it and realizing that like this is the most extreme example that we would do. That's obviously not going to land. So where can we land in the middle? And once we took that approach to kind of influencing the CEO, and we were able to, make a lot of wins. And there was a couple things that the sales team really wanted. So we were able to get those things in and kind of move the pitch deck and move the overall messaging forward by, working with the CEO and kind of the executive leadership team on how to do that. And then why that was important and what they cared about and what the results were going to be. But that was the main learning from that one, is sometimes you have to like your initial proposal can be a little bit not outlandish, but like kind of the farthest you are willing to go on it and the biggest swing, knowing that you won't get there and you kind of can backtrack on that. It's like doing a negotiation almost. I don't want to think it's that extreme because it's very cross-functional and you all want to get there together, but kind of that same concept of like, what's your first offer? And then where are you going to go in the middle when you get there?
Love that. Good negotiating tips. And yes, always very hard to influence the CEO in that way. I know Claire or Aurelia.
I sort of had a similar one at my past company as well. It was similarly redoing our entire, narrative and then turning that into, a pitch deck. So I was working really closely with the CEO on it. But the reality of how this is used or would be used would be by our sellers. Of course, our like CEO would use it, but as we all know, like a CEO can deliver their pitch of their value of their company without a slide or, with two slides or whatnot. So I think went through many iterations, obviously. And I think sort of the maybe failure at first was I was optimizing essentially for just for the CEO, right? Like thinking about like, okay, this is his company. Like we have to make it has to be his story and his narrative and the way that he would deliver. But the reality is that sellers aren't going to deliver it the same way as the CEO. And so then when I got into testing with AEs and different customers and things like that, I was getting a lot of other feedback. And so I made different changes. The CEO then didn't like it. So I think there was this whole process of, essentially trying to influence a lot of different groups. And then that kind of got into a place where I was like, what are I actually building here? Like, what's the story we're telling? And that comes to the takeaway that I have, which is sort of always anchoring back on like, who's the audience for this? What am I trying to accomplish? Like, what's the goal of how this thing is going to be used and by who and in what scenarios? And I think when I got back to that, it was helpful to then use that with my CEO to say, look, like, we have to find a middle ground in what sellers can deliver, because they're not going to ever deliver the story as well as you do it. And so we need to have things, this is really for them, not for you. Like we put whatever together, right, for the CEO. So it was definitely a long process and a lot of open feedback, which was very good. We ultimately got to the right place. But I think that's my takeaway is just as you bring in more and more stakeholders that you're trying to influence on something, just anchor back to or try to remind yourself throughout it if you're getting a little lost or getting a lot of feedback of like who's really the audience and why did you start this project in the first place.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll just like very quickly note, I think that's so powerful because it focuses you on what's the outcome, right? It helps to keep everyone focused on what's the outcome we're trying to achieve here. And hopefully through having this shared outcome can be more successful. I see you coming off mute. Do you want to dive into?
Yeah, sure. Love talking about longstanding failures that turn into successes. That's what PMM is all about. So my story is a little bit more on the flywheel self-serve side. We were seeing a trend pretty aggressively through the marketing lens that business teams were wanting to use Jira, the product that I run here at Atlassian, for project management. But we were seen as a technical tool for technical teams. And that has been the brand promise for a very long time. And that's been the product experience for a very long time. But on the marketing side, we saw a shift in the market happening. We saw a lot of competitors coming into the space, and we saw business teams really needing the tool that we were selling, but it just needed to be presented somewhat in a different way. Not just, there's other things that needed to happen too. But as we were seeing this trend, we started to kind of flag this to leadership across the board, all the way to the founders of the company, product leadership, marketing leadership, just saying, hey, we need to pay attention to this trend. We need to make a change. I think I was rolling a boulder up a hill for several years, trying to figure out what the right solution was to address this trend. And it was more than a brand and positioning thing. We tried that angle. It was more than just a product experience. It was more than sales. It was like something, it was growth. It was everything that was supporting the business. And I think the failure was just painting that picture of what actually needed to happen and how the customer would receive it and where all of the challenges were across all of these different cross-functional teams and across the business. Like the first failure that I had was attacking the problem statement from a brand perspective. Then I tried to do it from a go-to-market perspective. Well, maybe we could market it this way. But really what needed to happen was a very large holistic solution and change in the business. And I think the biggest lesson that I learned from that, after many attempts of trying to figure out how to get all of these different stakeholders on board for this change, the biggest takeaway was not giving up when you knew that the solution was the right solution, but maybe like your vision for what that looked like at the end was not exactly right, but you knew that it needed to go in a certain direction. I've been at Atlassian for almost 10 years. As I said, half of my tenure here has been trying to solve this problem. And I don't know. I'm still here. I'm resilient. I think that you need that in product marketing. You need that grit because it's not going to happen overnight. And then I think the other thing is, to what the other folks said as well, is that you need to understand who you're talking to and what they need to get from that proposal, and making sure that you tailor it to them. And then the third thing I'll add is always think about it from the customer lens. What is the customer experience that you're trying to deliver? And I've found in any kind of stakeholder management that I've done, or any kind of executive meetings that I've done in the past, is if I come with the customer experience and what they see from us, if I come with that first, it's pretty easy to get people on board, because it's either really messed up or they can see that there's a problem there, because it's nobody has time to go click through the website. You have to show them.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of high ground from starting with the customer and that empathy, for sure. And I would note also, I think from all of your stories, it always is interesting. The failures clearly resonate, right? It's those times that you had to go learn something, it didn't quite work, and kind of speaks to your point, Claire, about needing to be resilient and push through. Okay, next question. And this kind of actually starts to get to, Claire, what you were talking about. Do you change your approach to influence when you're working with different teams? So product, sales. Can you maybe give an example of how you've adapted your style or your strategy based on who you are engaging with?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think as product marketers, if you're not, probably not doing our job very successfully. Just getting to what Claire just said, right? It might be customer audience, it might be variety of internal stakeholders. So, I mean, I think the way that, with for me is, I think about the core audiences internally, let's say, right, with product marketing that I support, product, sales, executives, and then the rest of the marketing team. And then externally, we have partners, we have customers, we have analysts, and the way that we show up and tell the story or meet whatever their need is in that scenario should be absolutely tailored. So, I mean, if you take a customer, it's probably the easiest example. Like, you have to understand their context. How are they using your product? What other products do they use? What are their challenges? What are they trying to accomplish? And hopefully you're doing a lot of that pre-work and connecting with the seller ahead of time, so that when you're engaging with them, you already have all that context, and what you're preparing for them is relevant. Whether you're tailoring the demo, you're tailoring the roadmap that you might be presenting on where you're going, whether you're asking them for feedback or they're piloting, an early beta product of yours. Again, you want to make it very relevant so that A, they're not repeating things that you should already know about them. And two, you're getting the best, it's an experience tailored to them, and you're going to get the best outcome from that as well. I think internally, how you engage with sales product execs is very, very different. So, execs are going to, for the most part, everyone's a little bit different, but you're not going to put a long deck in front of them, right? And there's a reason there's something called an executive summary. And I think that's a go-to for me. What is the one thing I want this person to walk away with? There's a lot of details and a lot of things, but what's the one thing that I want him or her to leave, or group of execs, depending, with? Or it might be an ask, it might be something that they're thinking or an action that they take, but what's that one thing? And not adding too much other content, too much data or information that will then distract from it, which is a little tricky because you obviously have to have enough to support it. But I think when it comes to influencing execs, I find having the data in your back pocket is really critical, so that if they ask you questions on it, you're sort of audible ready, as I like to say, to be able to answer it, but you're not just putting it all out there in front of them. And then with AEs, maybe I'll hand it over, because I'm sure everyone else has different, thoughts. My approach with AEs is, everyone always says oh, you have to dumb it down for sellers. I actually don't think so. I think sellers are very, very smart, and it's a really hard job. And so my approach is being pretty direct. And I think that my most successful relationships with sellers has come from that, of just saying it how it is. Don't hide behind things. Don't give the fluff. If you don't have an answer, then just say I know this sucks, but we literally don't know yet. That's better than making something up or creating some talking points for them that isn't going to get them anywhere with the customer and is just going to create, more confusion for the customer or more frustration. So again, like pre-work of like, what do they need to know? Like what level? I think a good thing is like when you think about enablement for sellers, this is a tough one because you've a broad spectrum, right? You have the really experienced AEs who like sellers who really know the product. They can sell anything and they'll probably want to use most of the things that product marketing has created. And then you have like new joiners, right, who know nothing and need sort of the 101 and then sort of have the middle gamut. So generally I try to solve for the middle for like an initial enablement, like the middle of the road seller, like what would be useful for them. But I do find that like influencing the different types of sellers within an organization, you have to like, you kind of have to like cohort, for lack of a better word, like your sellers to understand what are the needs of those more advanced sellers and what can you do to influence them and help them versus, maybe those who are earlier on in their at that company or in their career.
Right. It's such an important point. Not even every function is a monolith, right? There are segments within those groups. Okay.
Sure. I'm just going to take an approach about how to manage with executives, stakeholders as part of this question. Just a couple lessons that I've learned in my career. One of those I think is the most important lesson that I've learned in the hardest way possible is that execs are not thinking about what you're thinking about at all most of the time. And unless they are, but and then you're like, the eye of Sauron is on you and that. But I would say when you're coming into a room, always set the context and always assume that they don't know what you are going to say or that they aren't thinking about all of the background that has gotten you to that point. You've probably spent a month, 2 months thinking about it, getting a presentation together. What is the headline story? You have to almost, as a product marketer, we should be really good at stakeholder meetings and management because we have a unique ability to take something really complicated and distill it down into something simple. And you have to do that with executives too. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway that I've had in my career. And then the other kind of secondary part of that is that you definitely have to bring different content depending on who you're talking to, but you should definitely stop and think about as Aurelia was just saying, like, what is that one piece of content that is the most important thing? What is the ask? And what do you want them to remember? And again, I think we have an advantage as product marketers to do that. But as far as stakeholder management goes, like, I think that applies across the board.
Greg, do you want to add or?
No, I agree with all that. Like Claire's point about exec stakeholders and like they're context switching so fast. Like the higher you go up in the organization, the faster and more dramatically, I think you're context switching. So they have no idea. I completely agree with that. I always like think about like the pyramid structure of communication, like what's the one thing and then a little bit more detail, then a little bit more depth. And I think when you build that out kind of at the beginning of your process of like, we need to make a decision, like these are all the things to think about. Like depending on your audience, you can start at different points in the pyramid there. When you're going to talk to the person who's going to do the work, they're probably going to want to start bottoms up and know exactly what the tasks are that need to be done. But when you're going to the executive, you want to go top down. I usually try and think through all of those things and then tailor that to the audience you're going to meet with. And it's a lot of different ways to tailor your speech, but like Claire and Aurelia said, like you have to tailor it depending on your audience. I mean, that's kind of like work in general, right? Even when you're dealing with your team, like you have people on your team with dramatically different working styles. So it's not even like department. Like even the people who are doing the same thing that you are doing, like you need to change your working style and your communication style when you're working with them, let alone jumping departments.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually gets into kind of the next question I wanted to ask. So I'd love in relationship to this, like what are the metrics, documents, ritual? Like, okay, so as you said, you've got a very effective to tailor, very effective to be able to set the stage quickly for what you need from executives, but really anybody, right? As you just said, Greg. What are like some of the tactical things you do? Like, right? To ensure that you have this influence and you're actually able to drive your project forward, whatever ask you need.
One of the like my favorite like very tactical things to do is kind of create a decision document and like outline like as you're going like what's the ask, the implication, like on kind of lay out what your position is, and then give people the opportunity to comment on it. And then as you're resolving comments, like adding in, like, Aurelia gave this feedback and that was good. Claire asked this question and this is the answer. So like, so when the next person in the approval chain picks it up, they can see the history that's not just in comments. Like you have to take it out of the comments and kind of formalize it and like finish those things. So the document evolves as you're going through the decision process. It's always the single place to go on the latest messaging, the latest feedback, the latest asks, all of that. Like I think sometimes when you're making a complicated decision or a big decision, the hardest part is like all of the different conversations and feedback and like half finished conversations that happen that don't end up in a resolution, especially as you're dealing with executive stakeholders. Like you could easily talk to people who like executives and you get like a directional answer, but like it's never as clean as you want. They're not like stamp of approval, like go. Like it very rarely happens like that. I think you get a super clean answer. So having one place that every open item and concern is documented and addressed that you can share around is really, really important.
Yeah, I want to jump on that. Like the having the decision-making framework and also who is the final kind of approver really top of the page is probably one of the best ways to move something forward. And I definitely agree with you, Greg, that you never get you never get that clean answer that you want, the like thumbs up, go for it kind of thing. Another framework that I love to use when things get really tricky is I think Mandel Communications put this out as like I call it a SIPAP, but it's breaking down by situation, complication, implication, position, action, benefit. And even if it's just one bullet point, it helps you structure in your mind and how you're going to approach talking about whatever the topic is. I often use this to develop strategy documents because I think it helps summarize like where are we today? What is the implication if we do nothing? Because doing nothing, don't forget, doing nothing is also a decision. And then where do you want to go next? And what is your position? And it forces, I think this is great also for those that are managing teams to help people kind of progress in their career because it forces you to have a position and actually think about what that North Star really looks like. So that's just a tool that I always have in my back pocket when something gets really complicated and I don't know where to start. I usually go to that framework.
I'm shocked you didn't say build a Jira board. Like I really thought that's where you
Next,
were
Greg.
gonna start.
That's the next step. SIPAP in Confluence, then we build the Jira board. But anyway.
I think I agree with all that was said. Two things. I mean, one, I think just like to build credibility and influence, like you obviously need to be first build the relationship and the mutual respect there. I think that we're not saying that, but that's the like foundational piece. And so how you do that, whether that's with your direct team, right? That's execs, those are peers, like it's different folks. And I think at different stages of your career, that shows up in how you build that in different ways, right? So like early on in my career, I know like it was like, let me do some things for people, like get some quick wins, show them like the value I can provide. And I think as you become a leader, what you can do for your team, and it evolves how you're gonna build that. So I think like that's number one. One, like the tips I guess I like for influencing, especially more at the executive level, but I think it any big meeting really where there's going to be a lot of folks and it's a little messy, where there'll be a lot of different opinions, is two things. I like to always send a pre-read, and most of the time people won't, like execs won't look through it. That's fine. Some people will, but for those who do, like they like to look through it and you'll get some good questions. And I think that just helps. And then even before that is the meetings before the meetings. And that helps essentially build whatever it is that you're going to be presenting. And I found this very successful, especially in my past role meeting with each different, executive on like their perspective, getting feedback on how you're positioning it. What do they want to see? That way you're not getting into the room where there's differing opinions already. You already have like the buy-in and support from a couple people that you need in order to help move it forward. So those are just some quick like things that I like to, or quick, but like they're not quick. It actually takes a lot of time, but things that I like to do. And then I think the other piece is just being very data driven. So if you're gonna like make an argument or hold a position, like hopefully you're doing it with the data behind it to support it for why you're doing that, whether that's something related to pipeline or ACV or revenue or, a customer request that, pays a lot or they're a big brand for you, like whatever it is, just having that data available and in your back pocket.
I love it. And Claire, you got a couple requests. What was the framework? Maybe we should say it really one more time. What was the framework?
Yeah, I'm typing the answers in the chat, but the framework is the SciPab. And then I think Greg was talking about a DACI or a RACI before for decision-making framework. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, maybe like one more, then we'll go to the audience Q&A. Tension. We've talked a little bit about this, but I guess I think would love to just know how you all manage competing opinions. So earlier, you just talked about talking with tons of execs. I have a hunch not all of them agreed whenever you talk to them. Like, how do you navigate that? How do you bridge like these conflicting ideas?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of everyone I do love a good racy. So I think if you start with that helps, because at the end of the day, if you can't get to a decision, there is somebody, responsible at the end of the day, and that's the person who's going to make the call. And I am a really big believer in the disagree and commit. So I like to anchor on that ahead of time on whatever project you're kicking off, is like, not everyone's going to agree. Call it naming, call it pricing, packaging, launch. I mean, the things that we touch, right, are messy, and there's going to be a lot of opinions. I think allowing people to give their opinion helps like throughout the process, because they feel like they're bought into it. And I think at the point maybe Greg made of like addressing the feedback and saying like, thank you, we heard that, and like, we're not taking it and here's why, or like, we're going in this direction and here's why, but giving, a providing some context to them on the decision, whichever way it went, I think is very helpful. And then again, kind of getting to the like, what's the ultimate goal, and keeping that in mind. I also believe in the 80-20 rule. And so like that kind of gets to the disagree and commit. Like at some point, like, are you going to fight till the death on this? Is this something that you're willing to do? Or is it something where like, yeah, I don't love the name in the end. It's not what I would have chosen, but it's not my decision. Ultimately, it's like my CEO is the decision maker on it, or, whoever it is. And so I'm just going to disagree and commit and move forward. But I think you have to kick off with that sort of framework and bring people along, is how I found it successful. Like, get everyone's opinion and bring them along. But then there's a point at which like we make decisions, because we have a racing, we have a timeline, and we're not just going to be like constantly a feedback machine. Like, we need to collect, move forward, and execute.
Someone said to me yesterday, I will commit to considering your feedback. Which, for the record, I didn't love as a response, but I thought I would share that. I think there's some truth in there though, which is understanding all of the pulls that are coming from external sources that are outside of like whatever the conflict is. Like in this example that I was just giving, this person is essentially going to have to go to our founder and our executive team and present a positioning, a recommendation that a lot of stakeholders have already put feedback into. And I have to have empathy for that future meeting that I probably won't be a part of, but I've contributed to at some point. And the feedback they then have to distill and come back with. So I guess my like short answer here is don't take it super personal and just have empathy for the other conversations that are outside of like your view of the world, and totally agree with disagree and commit unless you have some data point that is really worth continuing to chip away at, which is kind of what I was saying in the beginning. Like I knew that there was a solution and I wasn't going to disagree and commit, but I was going to keep chipping away because I knew that eventually we would need to get there. It was just that I was approaching it wrong. So you need to make sure that you have a balance, because if you have the data point and you're not presenting it the right way, then you need to continue to find ways to present that data point so that other people can see your worldview. And that comes with experience too, and just understanding how to work with lots of stakeholders, which takes time. So yeah.
That's so good. I love that. I will commit to considering your feedback. Also, we're probably gonna have time today, but I would love to know everyone's favorite name they had to commit to that they didn't like. But anyway, that'll be a whole nother panel. Okay, let's dive into some of the audience questions. Okay, this has got a lot of likes. I'd be curious people's take on it. Do you have any tips on how to use AI to help make cross-functional alignment easier? I don't know, maybe to influence like either that dot creation, synthesis of feedback. I don't know. Does anyone use AI, or how are they using AI to help with their stakeholder management?
I mean, I don't know if it's an influencing, but I definitely use it to like record, transcribe calls, notes, and then we have a notebook LLM can dump that all in and ask it questions. So like whether that's like talking to an AE about a deal or getting a bunch of feedback on naming or something like that as an example. I don't think that in itself influences. That's a tool to help me work more efficiently. I also like to use it on positioning. So not actually, I don't think it's really good at generating content yet, good writing, but I do like to put in some writing I have and get feedback or grade it and see where I can make it stronger. So that, I guess my tips are a little bit more like general AI for marketers rather than how it would influence per se, but
I think it's actually though really sharp, because I think it does, to your point, make you more effective, right? Whether it's asking better questions, having sharper communication. And just one actually follow-up question for you earlier there. Did you say you put like your notes with account executives and salespeople and stuff into Notebook LM, and then you ask it for feedback? Like you try to anticipate feedback or anticipate answers?
No, I guess I don't know if I could use it in that way yet, but I do put it in. So if I'm like talking to a lot of AEs on like, so one scenario could be like, I just got like a dump on this deal, right, about them. And so I just like transcribe that. And then I can clearly get like quickly a summary of things and pull together sort of like notes and takeaways on it. And then the second is like, maybe you're getting feedback on pricing and packaging with talking to a bunch of AEs or naming. So you're having a lot of conversations. And again, instead of actually taking the notes handwritten, which I do love a good handwritten note, and I still have my notebook and my stickies, I do just record and like get a transcription and then put that in. That way I can ask it questions, synthesize, see what common like feedback themes we're getting, things like that.
Super cool. This is a random one. Greg or Claire, any other thoughts?
No, I mean, I think kind of the same thing. Like we use it for consolidating notes and stuff. Like we just did a big field survey. We had a bunch of anecdotal feedback. We put that in for summary. I don't know, like if once AI could take over having complicated, like, cross-functional planning and like give and takes, like I think the robots will have won at that point. So we may be all out of jobs. So I'm not sure how much this is going to help. I think it's help like getting the right materials to have the right conversation, but I'm not sure that I see AI taking over actually having like complicated executive influencing sessions anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, I'll be curious if we ask this question a year from now, what people are saying. I do think the ability for it to provide feedback is, I'm going to put a deck. I've heard people, I'm going to put a deck in here. Give me feedback as if you were my CEO, as if you were. So there are opportunities to help there, but we'll give it a little more time. Okay. Next question. So How do you balance getting alignment from the right people and avoiding too many cooks in the kitchen? I know we've talked racy a few times here, but just, I don't know, any other thoughts about how to make sure you have the right people, you're actually influencing the right people and you've got the right people in the room?
I feel like for this one, you like can start broad so you're getting more consensus, and then you have to like tighten up the group who's going to make the decision. Like the racy models are good. I feel like sometimes you end up spending more time on the racy than the actual decision, though. But like you kind of know like who are the people who ultimately need to make this, and if they need to do it together or they need to do it separately. Because I always find too, like there's one executive, like say you need to get a decision from your CRO. Like the CRO probably has two or three people who he or she's talking to regularly, that you actually need to get to those people and like influence them first, so that when you go to the CRO, he or she already has some information about it. So I think like you need to start broad and then start to focus in as you go, because like when you start broad, you're getting more of the general feedback. Because like when you get to the last executive, you really want to avoid the like, oh, have you talked to Alex about this? You're like, oh no, now I got to go back to Alex and do the whole thing. You like want to have those potential like roadblocks addressed already. And so that's why I like start big and narrow.
I like that. Okay, no thoughts there. Otherwise, move on. We talked a lot about, I think, love to maybe spend another second. So the question about product owners and influencing them. And the question kind of says, how do you get them to confide in you early on, especially if it's not part of the company culture? However, I think probably there's a general component here of like, how do you get product owners and product management to trust you, be influenced by you? I've worked with a lot of product managers. They can be notoriously, I feel like, tricky. Any advice there on how to navigate that relationship?
I can jump in on this one. I'm really fortunate. I have a product leader counterpart who was a former product marketer. So I get to have that. That has not always been the case, but I'm lucky right now. But in building trust with my product leaders, I think there's a couple realizations that are actually really relevant to everything we've been discussing here, which is that you have to understand that they're not thinking about you and your role and your craft all the time. And they don't understand it at the level of depth that you probably assume that they do, and vice versa. And so I think knowing that constant education is part of your role in building trust with that counterpart will go a long way. And I don't mean education like, let me tell you about my social media strategy. I mean education about the outcomes that you are driving, that you and your team are driving, and what impact that will have on the product strategy, the roadmap, how you position it in market. And you can do this in a lot of different ways. I actually just do a quarterly roundup, like business review, marketing business review, and I record, sorry to shamelessly plug our products, but I record a Loom and I send it to my product team and they comment and respond on that. And we have an async meeting basically every quarter so that I can get wide distribution of that. I know that I have brought good information to that team and I'm not taking a lot of time out of their day. So I think just like building those types of touch points and rituals to build trust and showing that you understand business impact from the marketing perspective. Your product leaders, that's what they want. It's all about making money and revenue at the end of the day. And they want to make sure that the marketing is not just a cost center that's sending emails, which I think is a lot of times the perception, and the level of depth and strategy that you can showcase on a quarterly basis with numbers and impact, just make that part of your routine. And I think you'll build trust that way.
Right. It's about helping customers. And we just get money for doing that, Claire,
Oh,
right?
right. Sorry. That's it.
I would say that the other piece is my first boss said to me, my first boss in PMM, know enough to be dangerous. And I think that applies at all levels as you continue in your, grow in your career. So I think as an entry level PMM, that was like really being deep in the weeds of the product, knowing it in and out, probably to a level, right, than now. But I still think actually, and I think more people are getting more and more technical. And so I always just go back to that, like of how you work with product, like you should have a good understanding of the product. And ability to demo it, understand how it works, and ask questions that are going to make them think about things in a different way, and then bring the customer conversations and insights that you're having, because obviously they talk to customers as well, but you're having different ones, especially talking to analysts and things like that, as well as customers, and bringing that to them, I find very helpful. And I have found if you do that and start to obviously build trust just at the relationship level, you start to, partner much earlier on, where you're working together on the strategy and the roadmap and the offsites. It's not an after the fact. When I in my past company, which was RIP Drift, now is Salesloft, it was like when I joined, it was that like product would just ship things, we ship daily, and then it was like, KPMM, go like do something with this. And I was like, this is wild. Like we have no, so it took time to, and obviously there was like changeover and things, but took time to build that up, that muscle of how you work with product, the value that product marketing can bring. So
It's great. So, okay, so this next one's a little bit of I feel like a psychology question, but I'm sure there's some tactics here. How do you handle an escalation from a stakeholder that didn't feel included? So, yeah, I'll leave it there. So someone didn't, feel like you included them in a decision-making process.
I think it depends on whether they actually needed to be included and you made a mistake by not including them, or they just felt excluded and weren't part of like the informed process. I think that's a very different way that you would handle those two situations. I also think a lot of times when big decisions start to go, people just want to feel informed and feel like their point of view was heard, because at some point they're going to hear it from their boss. What's going on with this thing? And they want to know what's going on, and they want to say like, oh yeah, I talked to Greg about it, all's good. So some of it is like, I mean, anytime you exclude somebody, you have to kind of make it right. Like, sorry, like we'll get them included, get them up to speed, like have that extra call, their briefing call with them to bring them up to speed, hear their opinions, that kind of thing. Like, I think that you have to do that regardless. But then it's kind of like, how much influence does and impact does that person actually have, or do they just want to be informed? And I think more often than not, people just want to be informed. And so it's getting them, like adding that 15th person to the like weekly meeting. Like, what's the difference at that point, right? Like they could choose not to come, and they probably will choose not to come a lot of the time. So I think it's kind of like how you're communicating out. Like Claire said with the loom, like that's a great idea of like when you're doing a big project, like I do that too. Like, what's the weekly update on the project? With like every stakeholder under the sun on BCC, so they know what's going on. That's super, super helpful, I think, and can avoid some of these situations.
It's great advice. And always use Jira, use Loom. This is part of what I'm learning in this conversation. Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions. This one maybe almost take the role, your manager role. And I'd be curious your perspective here. Like, how do you coach your teams about when they should escalate versus when they should continue to try to influence? Like how? Yeah, where do you? I don't know. What do you tell them whenever they come to you and they're like, I can't get this person to do something? Do you step in or do you not?
I love this question because it's really a fine line. And I think like earlier in your career, everything kind of feels like an escalation, or you may not know how to influence. You're building relationships. You're also just understanding how businesses work. And I have a lot of empathy for folks just starting out in a remote or hybrid world too, because you don't have that kind of face time. So I think the advice that I give kind of depends on where people are in that journey. But for the most part, we are problem solvers. And I try to empower my team to solve the problem as much as possible through their network, and also a little bit outside, because sometimes, if it's with I don't know, say it's like a cross-functional team that's supporting you, like, the email team or something like that, that you're trying to get something from, you might have to just work at the ground level to try and understand like what is actually happening there. And it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but I would always assume really good intent from your coworkers. if you run into a place where you just don't know where to go next, that's when you start to escalate. So definitely try to solve it as much as you can. And then you escalate to your manager. And then if they can't solve it, that's when it kind of starts to go up the chain. But I know that sounds like kind of basic advice, but I think it's really fascinating to me how many people don't do that first, like don't do that diligence first. So that's kind of my perspective.
I completely agree with that. I think that a lot of the times, like people come to you for an escalation, and by the end of the call, you're like, okay, do you really need me to do something? And they're like, oh no, I can actually work on it myself. So I really like that. I will say though, like as the leader, I want to be informed of like a potential thing coming early because the worst possible scenario is the situation to be like bad and you have to like make it like if you had done something a little earlier, you could have made it like much easier to fix. But like you don't like I don't like to be behind in an escalation of like the thing's already like a huge problem and it's on fire. Like, don't come to me when it's on fire. Like, come to me when you like get a whiff of smoke, and so I can at least be involved and like help figure out how to not get to the fire stage.
Yeah, just to add on, because I like the I like the yes and the not yeah coming too late, like when the fire is already going is also rough. So there's a difference between an escalation where you need something and a hey FYI this is happening. And even just making that distinction, starting out in your one-on-one with whoever it is that you want to talk to, is just saying like FYI, I don't know if this is something or not, but I don't need anything from you. Just being really clear if you do or don't. And I mean, that goes back to what we were talking about going into executive conversations or whatever. Like, what do you need? If you need something, you need to make that really clear in the very beginning. Like, what are you asking for? That's the same with escalations. Make it really clear what you're asking for.
I love that. Okay. I love like a rapid fire last question here. What's one underrated, doesn't even have to be underrated, but underrated makes it maybe more fun skill that everyone on this call or listening should learn or focus on to be more influential?
I don't know if this is underrated, but I think people have a hard time doing it. At least I coach my team on it, is saying no, knowing when to say no. And I don't think it's always like no, never, right? It might be like a no, not now. This is like our priorities for the quarter are XYZ. This is why. And like we're, if we get bandwidth to do it, like we like the idea and we'll do it, but we can't. Might be like, it might just be a no too. Like someone said, like, don't just say no. Always say like, not now. And I was like, well, I don't necessarily always agree with that because I do think sometimes it might just be like, no, we're not doing that. But you give an explanation. But I think it's hard, especially when we get to this whole conversation of influencing, because the requests we're getting are probably from are all important, right? It's customer, exec, this analyst, like they're all important. So it comes back to like prioritization and that skill and aligning to what the goals are for the business and what's most important to drive the needle that you need to focus on. So I don't know if that's underrated, but I think it's a very hard one. And I think the learning how to do that effectively is where I found the most success in being able to grow a team, influence, et cetera, in my career so far.
I agree with all of that of like knowing to say no. I'm gonna take another take on that and say know when to say yes. Because I think a lot of the times we train our team so much, like what's the ROI, ruthlessly prioritize, all that kind of thing. Sometimes someone in a cross-functional role will come to you with an ask, and you can tell they're kind of in a tough spot, and you going out of your way to help them out, like will go a long way to building your relationship. Like people like relationships count so much for when you want to get things done that having like building up some capital and like building up that relationship, it's like the marbles in the jar, the Brene Brown analogy, like doing those little things like, hey, I just need some help with the deck, can you help me with this one thing, like it's an hour of your time or something like that goes a really long way for people who like you don't really need to do it and it's kind of inconvenient for you, it's not really helping your KPIs, but in the long term it's building that trust and relationship.
Totally agree. And I love the take of know when to say no, but also know when to say yes. My piece of advice here is completely different. I think public speaking is so important. And I think it's one of those things that many marketers don't prioritize for various reasons, mostly probably because it's very uncomfortable and it's really hard. But public speaking, even in front of a team of 10 people, all the way to being on stage in product marketing, I think it's a crucial skill that everybody needs to focus on and have. And there are lots of resources and classes that you can take. I will I will admit that I learned public speaking because I did stand-up comedy in San Francisco for just to like put myself out there in a really uncomfortable way, and it was like the best time of my life. And you could do that or you could do other things, but prioritize it for sure.
This was so much fun. I think that's time, but thank you. I think I will note that I would say, I think that influence is a really fuzzy topic and hard, and there was a lot of really practical advice here. So thank you.